Hello, my name is Christy Oliver, and I am the Professional Development Manager at Davis Publications. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our first professional development webinar related to the new Davis Art Education and Practice Series book, Therapeutic Approaches in Art Education by Dr. Lisa Kay. We are excited to share elements of the book that is a practical guide for those who wish to support therapeutic art making in their practice. It provides trauma-informed approaches that can be applied to a typical classroom setting, urban, rural, or suburban, and addresses those working with marginalized populations. Dr. K offers key elements, approaches, and practical guidelines for therapeutic art education with students who have experienced adverse childhood experiences and trauma. She provides curricular resources and educational art-making strategies to help students communicate their ideas, express emotions, and self-regulate that will provide teachers confidence to support their students' health and wholeness through art. This webinar is the first in a series of 3 that addresses therapeutic approaches in art education. In this session, titled Foundations and Intersections of Art Therapy and Art Education, looks at art education's historical influence on art therapy, highlighting some of the commonalities and differences between therapeutic art education and school art therapy. We will define pertinent terms with emphasis on real-world contexts. At the conclusion, you will be asked to reflect and notice through a specific prompt designed to spark hands-on making. Dr. Lisa Kay is an associate professor of art education, program head for art therapy, and chair of the Department of Art Education and Community Arts Practices at the Tyler School of Art and Architecture at Temple University. She is a board-certified and registered art therapist and art educator, whose work concerns the intersections and collaborations of art education and art therapy, focusing on students with special needs, resilience and art-making adolescents who have experienced trauma and adversity, and the use of creative arts and visual imagery as qualitative research methods. Dr. Kay's research and artwork have been published in the Wiley-Blackwell Handbook of Art Therapy, Oxford Handbook of Qualitative Research, International Journal of Education Through Art, International Journal of Education and the Arts, Visual Inquiry, Learning and Teaching Art, Art Education, and is a major contributor to Art for Children Experiencing Psychological Trauma, a guide for art educators and school-based professionals. Dr. Kay is a Fulbright Scholar, the recipient of the National Art Education Association 2014 Women's Caucus Mary Rouse Award and the 2016 NAEA Council on Exceptional Children and Kennedy Center Very Special Arts, and is a Peter Geiser Special Needs Educator of the Year for her significant contributions to the art education profession. She has exhibited her work in the United States and Europe. Her interest in narrative storytelling that encourages personal reflection, self-knowledge, and healing in the context of making art is evidenced in her scholarly publications, in her dedication to art education and art therapy, and in her selection of focus for her Fulbright and in her own art. Dr. Kay, can you tell me about your career?
Yes, of course, Christy. I'd be happy to. Throughout my career, I've created art with people of all ages and abilities as a means of communication, self-expression, healing, and rehabilitation. After working for many years as an art therapist in hospitals, developing programs on rehab, on pediatrics, on a psych unit, and even medical units, I shifted my focus to a special education context and began working with children, and my model shifted from a medical model to a psychosocial model. This model viewed students as artists and from a more holistic viewpoint, looking at their strengths and focusing on the whole child. This is important because there are students in your classroom who are experiencing hidden pressures, stressors, and trauma who could benefit from this sort of a model. In graduate school, I studied Victor Lowenfeld's Stages of Creative Growth and Development and found this to be useful in my clinical work as an art therapist. However, when I became director of an art therapy program at a special education school, my focus shifted. In this setting, I found some students benefited from a more art educational approach, while others benefited from art therapy. In some situations, my role was as art teacher. In others, I was their art therapist. Fast forward 30 years, I was back in school studying, teaching, and learning about art education and research in a doctoral program. Coming from a therapeutic background, I navigated in and between art therapy and art education and learned that everything was interconnected. This is where I discovered that I could infuse my therapeutic skills in addressing the social and emotional learning in the classroom and employ therapeutic art strategies to benefit students regardless of their developmental levels. The intention of this book and webinar is to offer you therapeutic art strategies to help support and enhance your art teaching. It will not make you an art therapist, as that takes years of practice and experience, but it will help you gain a better understanding of art therapy and how to support all your students in thoughtful, holistic ways.
What is art therapy? Can you define it for us?
Art therapists define art therapy in many ways, which contributes to some of the confusion and lack of clarity about the field. The field is positioned, as this slide illustrates, between art and therapy, art and psychology. Many art therapists and degree programs position themselves between these two spectrums or philosophical orientations: art as therapy or art as psychotherapy. In an art as therapy approach, the process of making art is healing in and of itself, while as in art psychotherapy, the art is used in service of therapy or in the process of psychotherapy. Art therapy is an integrative mental health and human services profession that enriches the lives of individuals, families, and communities. This is done through active art making, the creative process, applied psychological theory, and human experiences within a psychotherapeutic relationship, which is key. Art therapy, facilitated by a professional art therapist, effectively supports personal and relational treatment goals as well as community concerns. Art therapy is used to improve cognitive and sensory motor functions, to foster self-esteem and self-awareness, and to cultivate emotional resilience, to promote insight, enhance social skills, to reduce and resolve conflicts and distress, and to advance societal and ecological change.
Can you tell us of any new models for art therapy?
There's a new refreshing model set forth by Amy Buccarelli in 2016 that embraces a transdisciplinary perspective that encompasses a full spectrum of art therapy practice that includes art techniques and processes, psychological theories, educational models, sociocultural constructs, and also biological understandings. This model of art therapy is like a star here in the center that radiates to these 5 overlapping circles. Each circle represents a theme or different aspect of practice. This model resonates with what postmodern art therapy scholars recognize. Art therapy integrates many theoretical perspectives, divergent ideas, and concepts.
Can you tell us, how is this different than school art therapy?
Yes, I can. Art therapists in schools have been helping students with emotional and behavioral disabilities become more successful academically, while also helping them to develop social and emotional potential in what is called school art therapy. School art therapists are mental health professionals trained in both art and psychology to provide art therapy services. Some art therapists are also certified art teachers.
What can you tell us about art education's contribution to the development of art therapy?
Many people in art education have contributed to the field of art therapy as we know it today. 3 notable individuals were Victor Lowenfeld, Florence Kane, and Friedel Dicker-Brandeis. Victor Lowenfeld, Austrian artist and educator, was a student of psychology and philosophy. He is known for his landmark book, Creative and Mental Growth, in which he emphasized the significance of aesthetics, stages of artistic development, and the therapeutic value of art. He developed what he called art education therapy, especially with students with physical, intellectual, and emotional disabilities. Florence Kane was a progressive educator and author of The Artist in Each of Us. In this book, she presented creative exercises and therapeutic techniques to help free the artist within. She worked in an art education program at the Walden School in New York City with her sister, Margaret Naumburg, one of the grandmothers of art therapy in the U.S., who was the director of the school. Friedel Dicker-Brandeis was another important figure in the history of art therapy. She taught art classes to children and adolescents at Terezin ghetto camp in World War II outside of Prague. The book, I Never Saw Another Butterfly, documents the story of Friedel Dicker-Brandeis' students in the camp through their artwork and poetry. Her pedagogy and practice offers a template for art therapists and art educators working in contemporary educational and therapeutic contexts with students who have experienced adverse childhood and trauma.
Given some of the early influence of art education on art therapy, what are some of the overlaps and distinctions between these two related fields?
It's a really good question. Art educators and art therapists both attend to the psychological and the emotional needs of their students. They just do so in a little bit different ways. They recognize that people make artwork drawn from their own experiences and respond to these experiences in the classroom or the therapy setting. Art educators and art therapists assist students in exploring themes in relation to self, identity, and society. There are similarities between art education and art therapy, but the fields are not the same. Art teachers and art therapists work with similar types of people with similar challenges, creating similar environments for art making. However, there are key differences in the roles, goals, education and training, purpose, assessment, planning and preparation, and media considerations.
What are the different roles and the different people with whom art therapists and art teachers work?
Art teachers teach students with a range of cognitive, physical, social, emotional, intellectual, learning, and/or psychological and emotional problems and disabilities. Art teachers use their artistic skills to teach techniques or art processes and support their students' growth and development. Art therapists treat those with challenges related to disabilities, illness, trauma, and loss, physical, cognitive, and neurological problems, anxiety and depression, and other psychiatric disorders. Art therapists use their aesthetic skills to help students communicate, understand themselves and others, and mature psychologically.
What are the different goals for art making?
Art therapists and art teachers establish places conducive for art making. However, the goals for art making are different. Art teachers create spaces for personal and social inquiry through art and encourage the development of social, cultural, and learning skills through visual expression. They help students translate their ideas into images. Art therapists also create safe environments conducive for students to examine their interpersonal problems and strengths through individual and group processes. However, art therapists devise therapeutic interventions that facilitate the development of social emotional learning skills with their students and families.
It seems that there are some clear distinctions between the two fields. Could you talk about planning and preparation and any immediate considerations?
Art educators and art therapists both plan and prepare for their work with others. Art teachers develop lesson plans, instructional units, adapt lessons to students' needs, and prepare student portfolios as formative and summative assessments of student performance. Art therapists conduct initial formal assessments, develop treatment plans, and record ongoing progress on individual and group sessions. These notes include a narrative description and artwork to document the therapeutic process and progress.
And what about materials? It seems art educators and art therapists work with similar tools, materials, and processes.
That's correct, and that's what contributes to some confusion about what we do and how it looks. However, when making choices of what art materials to introduce in an art therapy session, art therapists consider the psychological aspects and inherent characteristic properties of media. Choices may also depend on the specific objectives of the treatment plan or the IEP and take into consideration the participant's level of functioning. For example, art therapists also consider media dimension properties, or variables. In this model, comprised of 4 different levels, materials are considered according to different qualities and developmental levels, like the kinesthetic and the sensory, the perceptual and affective, cognitive, symbolic, and level 4, which ironically or interestingly is the highest level in the model, is creative on both sides. This was developed in 1990 by Lusabrink. In regards to art materials, art therapists may offer an open-ended choice of materials like art educators do, or suggest a specific material depending on the goal they wish to achieve. Materials can be viewed on a continuum from structured to unstructured, or most controlled to least controlled. For example, a more controlled medium might be offering lead pencils, colored pencils, or even felt tip markers, while a more fluid, unstructured, less controlled material might be clay or watercolor. Media can also include new forms and platforms like computer-generated art, software editing, web-based photo sharing, video production, and social media.
Can you explain the differences in education and training of art teachers and art therapists?
As many of you know, art teachers complete a broad range of undergrad coursework in design, curriculum, education courses, and pedagogy and practice before they can apply for teacher certification. You have to pass required state exams on art ed content and pedagogy to become certified. You participate in professional development and continuing education to maintain your certification. Many you may choose to further your education with a master's degree. Similarly, art therapy includes a broad range of coursework in art psychology, counseling, and group therapy. An art therapist can become nationally registered and board certified, licensed in some states after completing a 60 credit hour master's in art therapy program. Like art educators, art therapists pass exams. Art therapists have to sit for a board certification exam to become board certified and registered in art therapy. They also participate in continuing education like art educators.
How would you describe this framework between the two fields?
Well, what I like to think about this framework comes from Judy Rubin, who wrote a book, Child Art Therapy. And this framework is the framework for freedom and creative expression. So both art teachers and I think art therapists, their personal qualities, expectations, and attitudes certainly influence the work that we do. There needs to be a sense of order and structure and boundaries and discipline in both practices. And yes, we do need to set some limits on the work that we do. The art created in art education and art therapy are visual forms of language that can be used in this framework for viewing, organizing, and understanding personal phenomena. They overlap in both fields, encourage play, spontaneity, the increased range of expression, promote a sense of community and socialization, and can increase self-worth and autonomy. As an art teacher, you can engage students in art making with these outcomes that can have a positive benefit on your students' lives. Guiding your students in showing and telling personal stories and exploring the significance of their own imagery can encourage meaning making in a way that promotes positive self-awareness and identity. Such an approach does not make you an art therapist, but it can enhance your teaching practice and connect with your students by drawing upon the therapeutic aspects of art and art therapy.
Now we'd like to invite you to reflect and notice.
Consider some of the similarities and differences between art therapy and art education that we've discussed. Use art materials of your choice to create a small visual note on tagboard or watercolor paper to illustrate your response. On the back, write just a few sentences about what you created.
What resources are available for folks if they would like more information?
There are a few books that I think are important for us to revisit. One of the books we talked about was Creative Mental Growth by Victor Lowenfeld. This book celebrates the children in their art production with emphasis on process of art and art making and the impact of learning rather than the product. Lowenfeld understood that as children grow and experience the world physically and psychologically, their physical, mental, and creative growth changes concurrently. Another one of my favorite books is called I Never Saw Another Butterfly, Children's Drawings and Poems from Terezin Concentration Camp. This particular book illustrates children's fears and harsh realities of camp life, along with their hopes, bravery, positivity, and resiliency. The Artist in Each of Us by Florence Kane illustrates practical methods by a true innovator in the field. And this work bridges art therapy and art education. Kane presents psychological and technical factors that impact learning, development, and personal growth through step-by-step strategies and case studies. Another important resources for you is the Art Therapy Association websites with information about practice, where to find art therapists, research. Very useful, especially those of you who may consider a master's degree in art therapy.
To watch the recorded session again, download session materials, or access the next two sessions called Trauma-Informed Practices and Taking Care of Others and Ourselves, and also to discover more professional learning opportunities and to purchase the book, which is coming in spring of 2020, please visit davisart.com/pd. Dr. K, would you like to tell us a little bit about the book?
Therapeutic Approaches in Art Education is a practical guide for those who wish to support therapeutic art making in their teaching practice. This provides trauma-informed approaches that can be applied to a typical classroom setting and addresses those with marginalized populations. Throughout, I have used vignettes and stories for illustration purposes. For confidentiality, all names have been replaced with pseudonyms to protect their identity. Each chapter has been designed with sidebars that help readers reference salient information as quotes, interesting facts, and resources. The Reflect and Notice sidebars and questions help readers individually or with groups of colleagues apply the information within each chapter to their own situations. The appendix includes a playbook, which is chock full of reproducible play sheets that address many topics ranging from mindfulness to stress and relaxation. Chapter 1 provides a foundation of understanding about trauma, how it impacts learning, including the neurobiology of trauma, traumatic grief, toxic stress, post-traumatic stress, and children's psychological and behavioral reactions to trauma, and what that would look like in children ranging from elementary through high school. Chapter 2 focuses on how therapeutic approach can aid teachers with particular demands and challenges of urban art education. Chapter 3 covers traumatic-informed approaches, characteristics, principles, and models that can be applied to art education. It also includes why art is effective with students who have had adverse childhood experiences. Chapter 4 looks at art education's historical influence on art therapy, some commonalities and differences between therapeutic art education and school art therapy. Chapter 5 discusses the curricular framework and creative arts curricular resources. Chapter 6 thoughtfully considers the art experiences playbook, much like a play script in theater, which has a collection of plays, or a notebook in sports that has a collection of strategies or plays. The playbook includes usable materials and examples. Often, teachers forget about self-care. Therefore, the book ends in Chapter 7 thinking about how to use art for self-care and offers suggestions for what art teachers can do after experiencing a traumatic event. My hope is that this book provides you with curricular resources and the confidence to support your students' health and wholeness through art.
Thank you, Dr. K. It looks like we have some really great questions ready for you here.
Wonderful.
Could you provide some examples of the approaches or techniques that art teachers could readily apply in their classrooms?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. And some of them are in the resource section with the webinar. One in particular is something I wrote about in School Arts Magazine, and it's called Scribble It Out. And it's a process that can be used in a lot of different ways. It could be a transitional exercise or activity you can use in the classroom, or it could be used kind of full of a substitute teacher perhaps maybe could use this lesson. And what it entails is using heavy duty Chunko crayons or thick crayons and encouraging kids or students to scribble as hard as they can for a short period of time. And then after they scribble on a piece of paper, we ask them to create a mandala, which is a small circular design that starts in the center and radiates out. And it's a way to really channel negative energy or frustrations or anger or tension, whatever, and help to calm students down. And there's also research, Christy, in this area in neurology that using deep pressure, like coloring really hard or wedging clay, has an effect of calming students down. So it's an exercise that could be done for 5 minutes. It could be done for 20 minutes, a large group, small group. And again, it would be up to the teacher's discretion. You know your classroom better than anybody else, how to set this up. But I found that useful. Another idea is something that I've used is I call it tear it up. And this is going to be published in School Arts in April or May, I'm not sure, March or April. And it's kind of a similar process, but you use torn paper. And kids, when you prescribe or ask them to tear paper, they usually don't hear that. Paper's pretty precious, but you could use magazine images, you could use newspaper, you could use scrap paper, and encourage them again to tear paper as small as they want for a prescribed amount of time, and then create an organized, it can be a mandala, it could be a mosaic, it could be anything you decided, but a more structured, focused design. And it's similar to the scribble it out exercise. Um, there are a couple of other things that we've got examples of in the resources. One is a play sheet called an altered journal that I've used, particularly with adolescents, but you could use it, I believe, with any age group. It could be a sketchbook or, again, an altered journal. And what I did with a group of adolescents that I worked with over a long period of time is they would cut out images or draw something on the cover of their journal, kind of as a do now. And they would do that for about 5 or 10 minutes. And then we would complete it over the course of the semester, embellish it, add to it. And then that journal could be a place for them to reflect on their experiences or write artist statements. Use it any way you'd like to use in the classroom. Guess another thing that I'd really encourage is using altered books. And I think there are a lot of art teachers that have used altered books. Have you, Christy?
Yes, I love them.
You love, well, and I think our students love them as well. And so in the play sheet, or I've got and examples of a lot of different techniques that you could use in altered books. And I think it's a great metaphor for taking something that's been discarded and thrown away and transforming it into something new. It's a great creative process, but especially with kids who've experienced trauma and negative experiences in their life, it's just a wonderful way to help them gain mastery over situations in their life.
Great. It looks like folks are interested in, if they are art teachers and they would like to go back to school for art therapy, how much additional schooling would be needed for them to be certified?
Well, there's a couple of ways that you could go about doing this. And I guess it all depends. If you already have a master's degree, there are some postgraduate certification programs in art therapy. There is one that I recently heard about that's fairly new in Edinburgh, Pennsylvania, and it's totally online, which is wonderful, especially for full-time teachers. So that's an option, and that's going to be about 30 credit hours. So it's still pretty rigorous. It's almost another master's degree, like in art education. We have a master's degree at Tyler School of Art that's 33 credit hours without certification. But what you're looking at if you don't have a master's degree is a master's in art therapy, as we talked about a little bit in the webinar, is 60 plus credit hours, 60, 63. And part of this has to do with the fact that art therapists or art therapy programs, excuse me, are also meeting requirements in many states that are similar to or the same as counseling degrees. So there's a lot of extra coursework required. So it's a pretty hefty load of 60 credit hours. So if you already have a master's, I think the way to go might be doing the postgraduate certification if you want to get certified as an art therapist. I mean, you could take courses in art therapy at different universities. You could go to the American Art Therapy Association conference. You could go to your state Art Therapy Association conference and get information. But if you want to practice art therapy and become certified, then you really do need to go to in a accredited program.
Great. Awesome. It also looks like folks are interested to know about, or if you could elaborate a little bit more on the boundaries art educators might struggle with when trying to assist students who are experiencing trauma. How much can we do as art teachers without being certified?
Well, I think what we can do is express concern and empathy for our students' experiences and try to understand what they're going through.
I guess I would advise, not guess, I would advise against trying to analyze artwork, trying to read into it what you think you may be seeing. That can be dangerous, and I think that sort of oversteps a boundary. But I do think that, well, one thing that I wanted to tell people is that we're going to be talking about that more in future webinars. The next one we're looking at or talking about trauma-informed practices. And some of those practices can be applied in the art classroom and help you feel like you are offering things to your students to support them and in their process and in their lives without doing therapy. So often I feel like, and I've experienced this in my own teaching at the university level, you feel sometimes helpless. You know students are suffering, you know students are struggling. And while we have resources to refer them at a university or even in school districts to school counselors or to therapists, we feel this sense of urgency to try to help them in right then and in the now. And I guess sometimes just being there and listening is helpful. We can't always fix things, but we can listen and be empathetic. And sometimes that's all that's necessary. But I think we sometimes try to too hard to fix things or feel like that's our responsibility, and we just can't. So I don't know if that helps, but that's what I feel like is really important. The other thing is to talk to your school social worker, talk to your school counselor. If you have a school psychologist, talk to your colleagues, because I think coming together, you may learn strategies from each other and get support. And if you feel like maybe you've gone too deep or you've overstepped a particular boundary, at least you recognize that, and that's the first step. And then you can learn what not to do next time, or learn strategies of what you could do with that particular student, because each student situation is going to be quite different.
I can tell you, I've had the pleasure of reading the draft of the book, so I feel very special at this moment to have had that experience. But I can tell you all that one of the really great things about the book and about the other two webinars is that Dr. K really sort of outlines therapeutic approaches specifically for art education settings. So it provides a lot of different techniques and tips on how to do that in art education without sort of crossing that line over into therapy. And I think the play sheets, two of which I know Dr. K mentioned, are in the resources section. I think those are really great places to start. It also looks like everyone is asking such wonderful questions.
Thank you.
If you had to recommend one must-do project that is therapeutic in the art room for grades K to 3 or 4 to 6, what would the must-do project be?
Oh gosh, K to 3, 4 to 6. You know, making art at that age, making art about relationships between self and others, those are really important. Anything you can do, and there are lots of them. Making art about feelings and expression of feelings. There are wonderful children's books that you can use, for a point of departure or a springboard. There's a wonderful book I love to use by Maya Angelou, and it's illustrated by Basquiat. And now I'm blanking on the name, of course, when I had to pull it out. But that's just a wonderful one. It's about fear. And so giving kids opportunities to express those kinds of things and encouraging them that it's okay to have those kinds of feelings, I think that's something really important that we could do at that level in that age group.
Great. Um, I know that in the other two webinars, we start them by you sharing specific stories of experiences you've had. There's a question here. Do you have a memory or a good example of how you have used art therapy to break through to a child?
Oh gosh, there are many of them, and I need to sort of sort of bracket this by a lot of the experiences would have been in a special education school, could have been in a hospital where I was working, but one that comes to mind was a little girl that would come into the art room with a lot of worries and a lot of stressors, and so we decided to make a special worry box. So I had her pick out a worry box that she could, or a box that could be recycled. And we decorated it, she collaged it, and then she wrote her worries down on a piece of paper. And we put them in the box. And then I had a really large art room, and my office was within that space. And so she came in I invited her in my classroom, excuse me, in the office, and we found a place that we could keep her box safe. So when she would come in the art room, if she had a worry or concern or a fear, then she would write them down, and we would get the box out, she would put it in, and then we'd put it in my office. So that's an experience that I used in therapy, but there's no reason why you couldn't use it in the classroom. Also, I just remembered the name of that book is Life Doesn't Frighten Me. Some of you might know it.
Wonderful. Here's a good question here. From a professional standpoint, what are your feelings about identifying or professionally identifying yourself as someone who may have experienced trauma or having a mental illness?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Do you mean identifying to your students, to the people you work with,
Yes,
to your students?
looks like.
I think you have to, that's kind of one of those boundary issues. I think you have to be cautious how you share that information, and it may be better to sort of be more general, talking about, understanding that, yes, I have my own struggles, or, I've suffered with some situations myself. I mean, that's a human condition that we all have. But the thing that sometimes happens, I mean, you can empathize with your students by sharing a little bit, but if you do too much, then they want to take care of you, and that's not their particular role. So I just think you need to be careful and think about why you're doing that. Are you doing it for your own needs, or are you doing it to help your students? And in what ways would it be helpful to them? And that, again, might be something that you talk to a colleague about or a friend about. It's not that you can't do it, but I just know as a therapist, we're really careful about sharing your personal background, because that's just a boundary that needs to be respected. But it doesn't mean that you can't.
Right.
But I would think carefully about that before you did it.
I would imagine also if it's a shared trauma, so if the school or the school community experienced something together, how might you draw from that shared experience?
Absolutely. And that certainly is something that collectively, if there's been a loss, if a child has passed away, if there's been some sort of tragedy, yes, coming together is certainly something that you can share and make art about it, and certainly gain some collective healing.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like people would like to know about specifically if you'd use your own experience as a point to advocate, but also about advocacy in general. how would you advocate for art therapy or therapeutic approaches in general, and what might be good to start?
Do you mean advocating for having art therapists in your schools? Is that kind of what people are thinking about? Or for specific students, you could make referrals to art therapists, or you can, again, you can't force anybody, but you could certainly encourage students to an art therapist. One thing you might consider doing is inviting an art therapist to come do a professional development in your school. If you want more information about their art therapy, and they could talk about some of these, make suggestions about things that you could do in your classroom and certainly in your whole school. Another thing that I think we talk about in one of the webinars, or it might be in one of the articles too, Christy, that you put in the resources. But collaborate with art therapists. A lot of times we collaborate with artists in residence. Maybe you collaborate with an art therapist and you team together on a particular project for your school, or develop a curriculum together, or yeah.
Yeah, the article that you wrote on partnerships is available in the resources. Great.
Great.
Fantastic. All right. Any other questions? I'll give you a minute to add anything else you'd like to know. If you have a question, you can add it to the chat box. I'll just wait a minute to see. Or Dr. K, is there anything else that you think would be important for people to know at this point?
Oh gosh, let me think. What else I want to add? Well, I guess one thing that I wanted to add is that I think a lot of art teachers are probably using best practices in their classroom that are providing some therapeutic support for your students, and you might not realize that you're doing that. So I know there's more that needs to be done and you may want to do, which is one reason that I wrote this book. But yeah, I want you to understand that just some of the best practices in teaching in general are going to support those students that you have in your classroom that have had or experienced adverse childhood experiences and also trauma.
And if the students are perfectionists or are negative about their own work, how do you assist them in using therapeutic approaches?
That's something that we all struggle with. So, gosh, I need to think about a good answer to that one. But I think we do sometimes find students that have experienced a lot of negativity or had negative experiences in their life, maybe are really hard on themselves. So maybe encouraging them to sort of be kinder to themselves and give themselves permission to make mistakes. We all need to do that. We're not perfect, for sure. But it is a struggle in art because, we want things to look a certain way, and sometimes we can't get it the way we want, and we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. So that's an ongoing challenge.
Okay. Well, it looks like we are just right upon 8 o'clock, so I want to be mindful of everyone's time. Thank you, everyone, for spending time with us this evening. We realize your time is valuable, and we're honored that you chose to spend it learning about therapeutic approaches in art education. An enormous thank you to Dr. K for presenting this session tonight and for providing such wonderful resources for all of us.
Thank you, Christy.
Thank you. I also want to thank Issa Ravel, who created the illustrations and play sheets that you'll see here. And just a friendly reminder to please visit the link davisart.com/PD to access the corresponding resources, including the play sheets, School arts articles written by Dr. K. We have a couple of articles from Art Education Journal. The chart on similarities and differences is also there, along with an overview of the book that's coming spring 2020, and for the 2 future sessions. So the 2 sessions cover trauma-informed practice and also self-care, and we're really excited. Those are coming soon, but they will be available at the link. We will send you a recording of tonight's session, so you can access it anytime. You can also tell all your friends to go to this davisart.com/pd link. If anyone is interested, we'll have the session up and available free of charge. If you need a professional development certificate, you can also get that by following the link. It's available there as a download. Dr. K will also be presenting her work at the National Art Education Association Annual Convention in Minneapolis in March of 2020. We expect for the book to be out by then, so you can come by the Davis booth in the exhibitor hall and see that, along with all the wonderful goodies that we will have there. And yes, please do attend Dr. K's session. And thank you again for joining us tonight. We hope you have a really wonderful evening.